Common Sense 1775 to 1776. Modern English translation. Author, Thomas Paine. Translation author, ChatGPT 3.5. Facilitator, Sir Adam S. Barnett. A pamphlet addressed to the inhabitants of America. By Thomas Paine. Introduction. Perhaps the ideas contained in the following pages are not yet widely accepted to gain general favor. People have grown accustomed to not questioning things that may be wrong, which gives them the false impression that those things are right. This initial resistance is natural and will eventually fade away. Time convinces more people than reason does. When power is abused for a long time, it leads to questioning the legitimacy of that power. The suffering caused by this abuse forces people to investigate matters that they might not have considered otherwise. In the case of America, the King of England claims to support the Parliament, but the people of this country are heavily oppressed by this alliance. Therefore, they have every right to question the claims of both the King and the Parliament and reject the authority of either. In this writing, I have purposely avoided personal attacks or compliments towards individuals. Praising or criticizing specific people is not the purpose here. The wise and honorable individuals do not need the validation of a pamphlet, and those whose opinions are misguided or unfriendly will change their minds on their own, unless excessive effort is put into convincing them otherwise. The cause of America is not just a local concern, it affects all of humanity. Many events and circumstances arise that have universal implications, and they stir the emotions and interests of all lovers of mankind. The destruction of a country through violence, the declaration of war against the natural rights of all people, and the extermination of those who defend those rights are matters that should concern anyone who possesses the ability to feel. I, the author, belong to this group, regardless of any criticism I may face. P.S. The publication of this new edition has been delayed in order to address any attempts to refute the doctrine of independence. As no response has been received thus far, it is presumed that none will be forthcoming, as the time required to prepare such a response for the public has long passed. The identity of the author of this production is irrelevant to the public. The focus should be on the doctrine itself, not the individual. However, it may be worth mentioning that the author is not affiliated with any political party and is not influenced by any public or private interests, but rather by reason and principle. Philadelphia. Printed and sold by W. and T. Bradford, February 14, 1776. MDCCLXXVI. Chapter 1. The Origin and Purpose of Government, including a brief look at the English Constitution. Some writers have mistakenly equated society with government, blurring the distinction between the two. However, society and government are not only different but also have different origins. Society arises from our needs, while government arises from our tendencies towards wrongdoing. Society promotes our happiness by fostering connections and relationships, while government restricts our vices through punishment. Society encourages interaction, while government creates divisions. Society acts as a supporter, while government acts as an enforcer. Society is always a blessing, regardless of its state. On the other hand, government, even at its best, is a necessary evil, and at its worst, it becomes unbearable. When we suffer or face the same miseries under a government that we would expect in a country without any government, our suffering is intensified by the realization that we contribute to the means by which we suffer. Government, like clothing, symbolizes the loss of innocence. The grand palaces of kings are built upon the ruins of the paradise that once existed. If our conscience were clear, consistent, and always obeyed without question, we would not need any other lawgiver. However, since that is not the case, we find it necessary to surrender a portion of our property to provide protection for the rest. We do this out of prudence, choosing the lesser of two evils. Therefore, the true purpose and goal of government is to ensure security. The form of government that appears most likely to achieve this goal with the least expense and greatest benefit is the most preferable. To understand the purpose and goal of government, Let us imagine a small group of people settling in a remote part of the world, disconnected from the rest. They represent the first inhabitants of any country or of the world. In this state of natural liberty, their first thought would be to form a society. There would be countless reasons to do so. One person alone would struggle to meet their needs, and their minds are not suited for perpetual solitude. They would soon seek assistance and support from others who in turn would require the same. 4 or 5 people working together could build a decent dwelling in the middle of a wilderness. However, one person alone would labor throughout their entire life without accomplishing anything. After felling timber, they would be unable to transport or erect it. Hunger would interrupt their work, and different needs would pull them in different directions. Even minor illnesses or misfortunes would be disastrous, as they would render the person unable to live, essentially causing them to perish. Thus, necessity, like a force of gravity, would quickly bring these newly arrived immigrants together to form a society. The mutual benefits of this society would eliminate the need for laws and government as long as everyone treated each other fairly. However, since only heaven is impervious to vice, it is inevitable that as they overcome the initial challenges of immigration and become more settled, they will begin to neglect their duties and attachments to one another. This negligence will highlight the necessity of establishing a form of government to compensate for the lack of moral virtue. A convenient tree will provide them with a state house, where the entire colony can gather to discuss public matters. It is likely that their first laws will be called regulations and will only be enforced through public disapproval. In this first parliament, every man will have a seat by natural right. However, as the colony grows, the public concerns will also increase. The distance between members will make it inconvenient for all of them to meet on every occasion, as they did when the colony was small and their homes were close together. Therefore, it would be convenient for them to agree to leave the legislative part to be managed by a select number of representatives chosen from the entire body. These representatives will have the same concerns as those who appointed them and will act in the same way as the entire body would if they were present. As the colony continues to grow, it will be necessary to increase the number of representatives. To ensure that the interests of every part of the colony are represented, it would be best to divide the colony into convenient parts, with each part sending its own representatives. To prevent the elected representatives from forming separate interests from the electors, it would be wise to have frequent elections. This way, the elected representatives can return and mix with the general body of electors in a few months, ensuring their fidelity to the public. This frequent interchange will establish a common interest among the entire community, leading to mutual support and ultimately, the strength and happiness of the government. This is the origin and purpose of government, to provide freedom and security. Now, let's discuss the Constitution of England. It was considered noble for the dark and oppressive times in which it was established. When tyranny was rampant, even a slight departure from it was seen as a glorious rescue. However, the English Constitution is imperfect, prone to turmoil, and incapable of delivering what it promises. Absolute governments, while disgraceful to human nature, have the advantage of simplicity. If the people suffer, they know who is responsible and can identify the remedy. In contrast, the English Constitution is overly complex, making it difficult to pinpoint the source of the nation's suffering. Some may blame one part, while others blame another, and every political expert will propose a different solution. If we examine the components of the English Constitution, we will find that they are remnants of 2 ancient tyrannies combined with some new republican elements. The monarchy represents the remains of monarchical tyranny, while the House of Peers represents the remnants of aristocratic tyranny. The new republican elements are found in the House of Commons, whose virtue is crucial for the freedom of England. However, the monarchy and the House of Peers, being hereditary, are independent of the people and do not contribute to the state's freedom in a constitutional sense. The idea that the Constitution of England is a balance of power among 3 branches is absurd. Either the words have no meaning or they contradict each other. To claim that the House of Commons serves as a check on the king implies two things. First, that the king cannot be trusted without oversight, suggesting that a thirst for absolute power is inherent in monarchy. Second, that the Commons, being appointed for that purpose, are wiser or more trustworthy than the Crown. However, the same constitution that gives the Commons the power to check the king by withholding supplies also gives the king the power to check the Commons by rejecting their bills. This implies that the king is wiser than those who were deemed wiser than him in the first place. It is a complete absurdity. Monarchy itself is a ridiculous institution. It excludes a person from the means of information and yet empowers them to make decisions that require the highest judgment. The state of being a king isolates them from the world, yet their duties require them to have thorough knowledge of it. The different parts of monarchy contradict and destroy each other, proving that the entire concept is absurd and useless. Some writers have explained the English Constitution as follows: the king represents one part, the people another, the peers act on behalf of the king, and the Commons act on behalf of the people. However, this explanation is like a house divided against itself. While the words may sound pleasing, upon closer examination, they are meaningless and ambiguous. When words are used to describe something that either cannot exist or is too incomprehensible to be described, they become mere sounds that amuse the ear but do not inform the mind. This explanation raises a previous question. How did the king acquire a power that the people are afraid to trust and always have to keep in check? Such a power could not have been given by a wise people, nor can any power that needs to be checked come from God. Yet, the Constitution assumes the existence of such a power. However, the provision in the Constitution is inadequate for the task. The means either cannot or will not accomplish the end, and the whole situation is self-destructive. The greater weight will always prevail over the lesser, and all the parts of a machine are set in motion by one. So, the question is which power in the Constitution carries the most weight, as that power will govern. Although the others, or a part of them, may slow down or check its speed, as long as they cannot stop it, their efforts will be ineffective. The initial power will eventually have its way, and what it lacks in speed is compensated by time. It is unnecessary to mention that the Crown is the dominant part in the English Constitution, and its significance solely derives from its ability to grant positions and pensions. Therefore, while we have been wise enough to prevent absolute monarchy, we have foolishly given the Crown control over the key. The preference of Englishmen for their government by king, lords, and commons is based more on national pride than reason. Undoubtedly, individuals are safer in England than in some other countries. However, the king's will is just as much the law of the land in Britain as in France, with the only difference being that it is presented to the people in the more formidable form of an Act of Parliament. The fate of Charles I has only made kings more cunning, not more just. Therefore, setting aside national pride and prejudice in favor of forms and systems, the plain truth is that the Crown is not as oppressive in England as in Turkey due to the constitution of the people, not the constitution of the government. It is crucial to examine the constitutional flaws in the English form of government at this time. Just as we cannot do justice to others while under the influence of bias, we are also incapable of doing justice to ourselves while bound by stubborn prejudice. Like a man attached to a prostitute who is unable to choose or judge a wife, any preconceived notion in favor of a corrupt government constitution will prevent us from recognizing a good one. Chapter 1 Summary. Paine begins by exploring the fundamental purpose of government, asserting that it arises to protect the rights and interests of individuals. He challenges the notion of hereditary monarchy, advocating for a government that derives its legitimacy from the consent of the governed.